Fast and Furious. Most of you will know the monstrous Stoker-class dragon that Hiccup and Toothless face down against at the end of the first movie as the Red Death. Except this green dragon wasn't always the Red Death. In fact, it was originally an entirely different dragon. Today we'll be delving deep into the mysteries of the Red Death, one of the series' most powerful dragons. And then there's this whole other dragon which is called the Green Death, which looks like the Red Death, which isn't green, but it might not even be a dragon in the first place. So, I'm clone number 87 and I'll be taking you through some dragon lore before original Tim orders me to be fed to the beavers. They're, vicious, carnivorous, Australian beavers, of course. So the first How to Train Your Dragon film is loosely based on the first How to Train Your Dragon book. It uses the characters, it has Hiccup and Toothless becoming friends, and it has the two of them taking down a huge green dragon at the end. Stoic the Vast even describes it in saying, "This dragon is huge, enormous, gobsmackingly vast. I've never seen anything like it. This is more of a mountain than a dragon." But this dragon from the books wasn't called the Red Death. It was in fact called the Green Death. With this in mind, the creators of the film series of How to Train Your Dragon originally designed the dragon that Hiccup and Toothless would face down against at the end of the film in Nicholas Marlet's vision, which was that it was to have a jellyfish-like bioluminescence, a coral-shaped mane with stylized tendrils that float like sea plants, and detailed barnacle-inspired scale designs. And this fits very nicely with the description of the Green Death from the book series. In fact, it's really close. Let me give you an example. More like a mountain than a living creature, a great glistening evil mountain. He was so encrusted with barnacles, he looked like he was wearing a kind of jeweled armor. But where little crustaceans and coral couldn't get a grip, in the joints and crannies of him, you could see his true color. A glorious dark green. It was the colour of the ocean itself. These two dragons from both the books and the films were both designed to have this barnacle-looking armour, like it's jewel-encrusted, but most importantly, they were both designed to be sea dragons. In the film series, that would have meant that the Red Death was intended to be a tidal-class dragon, like the Bewilderbeast. And what's more interesting is that at this point in its conception, the writers also intended for this dragon to be called the Green Death, not the Red Death. And we know this because when you look at the official score for the movie, this particular soundtrack, I'll give you a listen. Written beautifully by John Powell, is called Guess What? Battling the Green Death. And I would have loved this deep-sea dwelling, alien-looking, covered in barnacles, kind of creepy, rising out of the ocean image that we can kind of see being developed here. I think that would have been really cool. And maybe they didn't go with it because they wanted a sea dragon for the second film, which was what we got with the Bewilderbeast. Originally, the Red Death was going to be this creature of the deep, rising out of the ocean, serpentine, kind of Cthulhu-esque. That would have been magnificent. Even more intimidating. And it's interesting that they went with the design that they did, because the Red Death in the end kind of looked like a standard dragon. It didn't have anything that was particularly unique like we see with the Bewilderbeast. So it was only later on that they officially called it the Red Death rather than the Green Death. And we know that because in the final script for the film, the dragon is referred to as the Red Death and not the Green Death. Dean DeBlois, the writer and director for How to Train Your Dragon, eventually decided to have the Red Death reside in a volcano rather than the ocean. But even so, we can still see some of that deep-sea dwelling, ancient part of the ocean, serpentine, Cthulhu-esque elements to its design. Wow, that took a lot of attempts to say. It may not have barnacles all over its skin, but its crown is distinctly coral-looking. In fact, the colour given to the Green Death in the books is described as this, a glorious dark green. It was the colour of the ocean itself. So the question becomes, why did they change the name from the Green Death to the Red Death? After all, it still remained green, even if the design was different. In fact, it's one of the few things that they kept from the original design. It still looks like the colour of an ocean, in a way. Well, that's because I don't think that the term Green Death actually refers to its colour in terms of its scales. I think it actually refers to its fire. In the books, Crosswell notes that Hiccup was standing right in the middle of the Green Death's circle of bright green flames. It's referring to the fire, and what colour is the Red Death's fire? Red, as in Red Death. You're going to die in an inferno of red flames. Good to know, instead of dying in an inferno of green flames. You know, you can pick. Which would you rather die in? I'd probably go with green. I just think it looks cooler. Might as well get some scenery when you die. So there's a green death in the books and a red death in the films, and they changed the name because of the colour of its fire. At least that's my theory. But there is one more dragon that we need to talk about. The green death. And not the one from the books, but a different one that looks exactly like the one that is the red death in the films. Yeah. There is a dragon in the games, The Rise of Berk and School of Dragons, called the Green Death, which looks next to identical to the Red Death from the first film, and Astrid even describes it in calling it the less aggressive cousin of the Red Death. But Vulca later calls it a member of the same species, so it's hard to know quite what they meant there. But either way, it's related to the Red Death from the first film, but somewhat different. The question to be answered is whether or not the Green Dragon in the games is actually canon, because we've never seen it in the TV series or in the films. Rise of Berk, for example, isn't strictly canon because it's not written by the creators of the film or TV series, but School of Dragons does actually have input from the writers for the TV series, so some people can legitimately call it canon. There is a really good article by Whisper the Wolf on what is canon in the How to Train Your Dragon world, or how it should be ranked. I've linked that down in the description below, so you can go check that out and see where all the stuff, the comics, the films, the TV series, the games, how they all fit in, and what takes precedence. But even so, there are some inconsistencies in the School of Dragons story, meaning that it can't be canon. So it's hard to know, and you can come legitimately down on either side of the debate. But in summary, there's a Red Death in the films, which was once the Green Death, but there's also a Green Death in the games, which may or may not be part of the same universe as the films, but then there's also a Green Death in the books, which the Red Death was inspired by originally, but then it became the Red Death instead of the Green Death, even though it kept some of the elements. Simple. As promised, I must now do my clone duty and feed myself to the carnivorous Australian beavers. Goodbye. Question of the day, what is the most dangerous thing that you've ever done? Let me know down in the comments below. In the meantime, I'd love if you come follow me over on Twitter, support me on Patreon, or email me stuff that you made in the address and links in the description below. Stay nerdy, sub-furies, and I'll see you in the future.